views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of Time Warner Cable.
Hello and welcome to The Bottom Line. My name is Dana Connors and I'm pleased to be your host for this monthly program brought to you by the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. By now you know that each month we take a look at some of the critical issues facing our state, some of the events, and as well as some of the people, all at work trying to improve the lives of Maine people as well as the livelihood of our state. With all of that, today's program is clearly one of those priority issues. It's broadband, often described as high-speed internet service for our state. It's something that we all know we need, even if we can't define it. You see, we recognize that it's fundamental to the success of our economy. All businesses, large or small, need it to compete and be competitive in this global economy. But it's also essential when we consider our educational needs or the crucial impact it has on healthcare in our state. It serves to help our aging population and certainly critical if we expect to attract and retain our young people to the state. And when you have a rural state large like ours, the cost to provide that service is clearly probably more than in most states, but no less critical. The need is ever present, but when you go to address that need, here are some of the things you're going to find. That your wants are different than your needs. And all of our needs may be a little bit different, whether you're in a small business or the type of business you're in or the different sector that you may be in. In other words, one size does not fit all needs. That is the challenge, but it should not discourage us from trying to provide the universal service that provides that level of competency and ability to serve throughout our state, to every corner of our state. Access is where we begin today's program. And with me, our first guest is Ben Sanborn. Ben is the Executive Director of the Telecommunications Association of Maine. He's been with them a long time. They represent a number of providers and have a strong presence in the rural part of our state. Ben, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Let's begin at the beginning, as they say, and talk about access. What does, in your words, with your experience and background, what does access to broadband, high-speed internet service mean to you?
Access to broadband means a number of different things, as you were mentioning, for different segments. For the residential individual, it means the ability to consume content, whether you're talking about something like downloading Netflix, but it's also important in terms of aging in place so that you can do telemedicine, so that you can have a virtual physician visit. And it's important for kids coming home from school to be able to do their homework at home, and it's important for the home offices to be able to access cloud computing services. Now, for a small business, it's something that is a little more complicated. It's being able to get your inventory online, being able to process a lot of orders that may be coming in from across the country or across the world. And for a large business, you may have to have even greater needs in terms of being able to coordinate multiple locations for your business and really perform, again, on the global level.
When you start to talk about that, already you start to get the picture that there are so many various needs, and you can't satisfy all of those needs with one level of service, but yet we have that responsibility to try to be sure that we provide that level of competitiveness, if you will, in the service that we provide. So there's that basic, maybe not basic isn't the word, but there is that level of service that allows us to be competitive with other states, as we go about our business or meet our individual needs. That brings us immediately to the question of level of service, up speeds, down speeds to serve those businesses or those individuals. I don't really want to get into, or desire not to because of time limitations, the tier of services that are within each of those, but from a very basic fundamental service criteria, I can think of two that apply to us And they're both measurements that we should, in my mind, keep in our minds. One is, what's the federal standard, which I understand to be 25.3, 25 download, 3 upload. And about a year or so ago, the state adopted its own, which was 1010. Can you expand upon that and enlighten our viewing audience as to what that really means?
Sure, absolutely. When you're talking about download and upload speed is what it takes to consume content, meaning what does it take to download Netflix or download the class schedule if you're doing online learning, that sort of thing. And upload speed is what it takes for you to send something out to the internet. So if you're at home, it's what does it take to either send out an email, or if you're doing some cloud computing, what does it take to download your backup to the cloud. If you're in business, obviously that's going to be more important for the upload speed. Now, what the federal definition is, the 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload, what that speed is intended for is primarily for residential uses for consumers of the services, but with enough of the upload, again, to meet the needs of things like aging in place and telehealth. Because if you're dealing with some of the new items like the ability to have a virtual physician visit, you need to be able to have a real-time communication with the doctor. And that means that you need to be able to upload some video in a meaningful manner. And so you need to have some of that upload speed. But the FCC has determined that 3 meets those needs. 1010, the state standard, is designed to be symmetrical, meaning that you can send information to the internet as quickly as you can get it from the internet. And that's something that you see in businesses more than you see in residential needs.
So let me ask this. They're both aspirational in nature. We're not at 25.3 today. We aspire to be there. The same can be said, if we just put in that place a year ago, the 1010 is clearly something that the state is aiming for. The difference between the two I need to expand upon, but I was able to obtain some slides that I'm going to put in front of you. It'll be on the screen for our audience to see.
Sure.
But they kind of put in place those two measurements, if you will, against the national level in terms of where we are in comparison. So the first one takes, I'm going to ask you to look at these. The first one takes a look at how many homes and businesses in Maine compared to the U.S. do not have broadband. And what you see here is that the U.S., there's 3% that do not have access to broadband. Maine is 2%. As we continue on, because I think we need to go through these kind of quickly, how many homes and businesses do not meet the FCC standard of 25.3 megabits per second, as you just described? In the US, it's 15% versus for Maine, 14.6. How many homes and businesses do not meet the Connect Maine standard of 1010? Is 38 nationally, 92 in Maine. What does that tell you? I can tell you what it tells me, but what does that tell you?
Sure. It does tell you a couple things. One is that we're pretty close to on par with the national average when you're looking at what the federal standards are for the 25 down, 3 up. And it also shows that when you're looking at this symmetrical standard, we are a little bit out of step with what some of the larger communities are, but you have to look at also what the national average is taking into consideration, which is places like New York City and LA that we just don't have something that's akin to that. So it's certainly something we can work towards, but it's not necessarily something we're at right now, and it creates an interesting perspective that Maine is somehow falling behind the national standard.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly to my point. It is aspirational. It troubles me a little bit because not that I can put myself in their place. I mean, they know so much more about this than I. But what it does do, it puts us into a place of thinking that we're inferior when the numbers, when you look at it on a national basis, we're in the middle of the pack. We're very competitive. That's good news, and we could use good news. It doesn't say we're there yet, but it says we have pretty good standing. And so when we evaluate ourselves against our own standard and we publicize that, that shows a weakness that I'm not sure is really fair in my mind. Again, I don't say that to discredit them. I just say it because we really need to make the point as we try to distinguish ourselves in a level of service that we don't do ourselves harm by not differentiating and explaining. This is new, this is why we're doing it, but on the national average, we're in the middle of the pack. I say that because it always bothers me when you come out with these listings that put us at the bottom and then we repeat it 10 times In this case, we don't need to. But it also tells me that our primary goal, at least as I see it, that we should be creating a plan to meet that 2% that does not have broadband, and do what we can about that, I'm using the national standard now, that 15% that's underserved. My question is, are we doing that? How well are we doing it? And what standards should we use?
I think we're starting to do it. I think that we're really moving in that direction. There is an event going on at the Connect Maine Authority right now. They're drafting a strategic plan, which was the result of recent legislation with regards to sort of reworking how Connect Maine Authority operates. And they are taking a closer look at where are our gaps and how do we meet them. And that's really the critical piece here, is to identify the gaps. And the biggest issue that we have found is that there's a lot of anecdote and there's a lot of fact. And policy is unfortunately being made through the anecdotes rather than through the facts. The anecdote is we're at the bottom of the pile. The fact is we're not. We're in the middle, and in fact, if you look at a breakdown of the 25.3 from the FCC, 39% of the country in the rural areas, 39% of the rural areas nationwide do not have access to 25.3, compared to only 17% in Maine. So Maine is actually doing a lot better in its rural areas than the national average. And similarly, an issue that comes up a lot is competition. Nationwide, 19% of homes and businesses have access to 4 or more competitors. In Maine, 55% of homes and businesses have access to 4 or more competitors. So we're doing a really good job on a lot of fronts. That should be something that we talk about more. And then when we're filling in this last mile, when we're trying to figure out how do we get the universal access, it's important to have aspirational goals, but you need to have road markers along the way that we can actually get to in the near future in order to make sure that everyone has these opportunities. If you set the bar too high and say we're going to go from point A to F and you don't figure out how you're going to get there, then inevitably you end up spinning your wheels.
Two things come to mind. Number one, what you said about our standing and taking stock of the good news is that it's a reflection of over $700 million having been invested by a provider community into our systems over the last 8 years. That is significant. And there is more to do, but I think you speak vividly, which our next guest is going to build upon, in terms of you need a plan, and you need to recognize that plan is for all of us, and it's incremental in nature, and it takes time to complete it. But if you don't have a roadmap, if you don't have that concept in mind, we'll be forever chasing that dream. Ben, you're not going to believe this, but our time is up. I appreciate so much you being with us. Look forward to working with you on this issue, and thank you so much for being a guest. We're going to be right back, and we're going to talk about what's happening in the legislature to help us deal with this very important issue. Please stay tuned. Welcome back to The Bottom Line as we continue to discuss this, what I would describe as a critical issue for the people and the prosperity of our state. I'm pleased to welcome to the second segment our Assistant Majority Leader in the House, Sarah Gideon. Sarah, it's a pleasure to have you with us. I know how important this issue is to you. Let me begin by kind of picking up where we left off. That is a lot of talk in the first section about aspirations, trying to provide a universal level of service and to reach that intended goal. But you and your counterpart, the bipartisan effort, Garrett Mason, the Senate Majority Leader in the Senate, the two of you put together a bill last year that spoke to the role of municipality and the private sector coming together, the importance of planning, but you took that aspirational goal and made it an intended goal to meet those needs, whether they be economic or personal. Can you tell us what that was all about, how you did that, what it means?
Yes, it's great to be here with you today, Dana. Thank you very much. Yes, I think there's an important aspiration and intention go together to some degree, but when we're talking about broadband infrastructure in the state of Maine and the economic development that goes with it, for which broadband infrastructure is absolutely essential, we're really talking about intentional planning on the municipal level, on a regional level, on a state level, that then sets the stage for the economic development which we so desperately need in this state.
Right. So what did your bill do?
Well, our bill basically looked at the landscape of Maine. The first thing we did, Senator Mason and I, was we looked at the state of Maine and we realized through our experiences in the legislature that there were gaps and holes in this large rural state where people did not have access to true broadband. In other words, true high-functioning, always-on internet, right? And we did note that in the past recent years, we had made tremendous strides. So through the development of the Connect Maine Authority, through the three-ring binder project, we had really come so far. And we recognize those, and we really wanted to applaud how far we'd come. If you think of it this way, if you think of the state of Maine and think of having a large paintbrush, we had taken that large paintbrush and painted it with internet access for a lot of people, a lot of addresses. But what was left were these really hard to reach places in the rural state of Maine. And what we noted was that the market was not automatically going into those places and getting to that last mile on its own. And that if we wanted to do that and be competitive in a global marketplace, we needed to figure out a way to help that happen.
And you did. And one of the things that I marveled at, either the result of that bill or the implementation, the discussion of it that ensued, was a process that was established that not only helped address that unfilled need, that lack of service that exists, that 2%, but also helped to address the confusion that many places, municipalities are having with trying to understand, what do I really need and how do I go about it? And to what extent do I build my own or use the private sector? That process I'd like to have you share, because I think it's illustrative of what we need to do, but also how we need to do it.
Sure. So what we know, whether we're talking about broadband or other subjects as well, is that sometimes we don't know what we have. So what we did with this legislation was we asked the Connect Maine Authority to come up with a strategic plan, which they are in the process of creating, so that these planning grants can happen. And that means that the Connect Maine Authority, if a region or a municipality or even a group like the Farm Bureau, for example, comes to the Connect Maine Authority, and if they apply for a grant, then the Connect Maine Authority can help them, number one, first look at what exists already. That's one of the most important things. You don't want to build on something you already have. So you need to take stock. And then you need to decide, where do you want to be? So that you can actually, third, make a plan to get there. And making that plan to get there then involves the municipality or region going out to the private industry and working with them. And so it's, in a sense, it's like a catalyst.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that that information in terms of what you have today is more often than not that this is exclusive, but more often than not, you reach out to somebody that's in that industry to come in and say, here's what your inventory is, here's what your standing is, here's what you have, but here's where you need to be. This is the gap.
Exactly.
Is that oversimplified? But
That's a great way to explain it, yes.
So that's in place. You mentioned the Connect Maine, which has the broad authority of trying to help us reach that 2% unserved. And I know that they're coming into the legislature with a 3-year plan, an incremental plan to get us to that chosen land, so to speak.
Yes.
Is that imminent? Is that 3-year plan that they're presenting to the legislature, is that in process? Are we expecting to see it this session?
We do. I mean, I think they're taking their time to do it right. We hoped to see it even by now, and I think we will see it imminently.
Yeah. Is it fair to say that they are grant-based? I mean, they're the ones that have the $1.1 million, and if the bill passes, that's before the legislature right now, that amount increases to a couple million to help more regions or communities, as you described. Is it fair to say that that's part of the reason they chose the 1010, because it's a higher standard and it allows that level of service to be greater? Yeah.
Sure, there's a couple of reasons, I think. First of all, this is such a rapidly changing world.
It is.
So if we set our standards low, we're going to find ourselves behind before we even start building things, especially when we are willing to step back and take this slow and thoughtful planning process instead of just sort of throwing money at something. So we don't want to be setting ourselves up for, cutting edge broadband for the year 2000. We want to be setting ourselves up so that Maine people are actually competitive, not as consumers, but as producers of goods and services and talents.
But I still go back to share a concern I expressed in the first segment, which is, that's great. And I understand, the more I get into this, the value of the symmetrical approach to things, and that's why you'd compromise going, if you would, 25 to 10 on the download. But I'd also, because of the position that I occupy 5 days a week, and understand how people look at ratings and will draw conclusions. And Mainers by nature, I am one, so I'll take this as a self-criticism. We tend sometimes not to see the positive because we're focused on the negative. And my biggest concern is, if we're always evaluated against the 10-10 without putting it into context with the rest of the nation, I should say, we're going to find ourselves always believing unfairly and unnecessarily that we're at the bottom of the heap, and that's not true. That's my biggest concern.
Sure.
We need to take that extra time and say what you just said, that 10-10 is where we want to be because technology is changing and we want to be the head of the pack. But in the meantime, we stand up pretty darn well with the rest of the nation.
Well, we do. And I think that it's important to recognize that when we're comparing ourselves to the rest of the nation, or rather when the rest of the nation is comparing us, that we are stacked up on the same standards as everybody else.
Well said, yeah.
But when we are looking at what we want to do, when we are looking at how to make Maine better, when we think about speeding up around the turns instead of slowing down and being left behind, this is absolutely where we need to be.
I think that is the key. You need to have that comparative status, but you also need to try to gain ahead in the pack. Let me go to we don't have a lot of time left, a couple of minutes, but I wanted to be sure that I addressed the issue that seems more and more present, and that's municipalities are getting into the game. And truthfully, as a city manager, I understand that, if you've got needs that the citizens want and so forth, but at the same time, you've got a private sector out there. Not to get too specific about answering this question, but in looking at the role of municipalities and the state, do you have an opinion as to where that kind of falls out? How should we be using state or municipalities in addressing this bigger issue?
Well, I think that the answer is pretty simple, that a municipality probably knows the needs of its residents and its businesses better than anybody else.
So long as it's fact-driven.
Sure, sure, I agree. Let's deal with facts and
Yeah.
science always. And so that's where this comes into play, that this allows a municipality to take stock of what they need and to decide where they want to be. But it also then provides a set of standards that, as other municipalities and regions are looking at what's been done, they can start to follow, a recipe, if you will. I think that what we are not trying to do, and I want to be very specific about this, is we are not trying to get to a place where municipalities are trying to start their own utility or run their own, internet, be their own internet service provider. That's not the goal here at all.
Yeah, that's a very significant point, and I think when this is all said and done, we're going to find out that we have a rich possibility in terms of meeting the needs and positioning our state, building upon a success so far, but it does include both of us working together. I mean, it sounds a little bit like your father preaching, but not that your father preaches, but the truth of the matter is the private and the public sector does have a role in the solution. It's not about one or the other, and I think that's an important point to be made, and you made it well. We're going to be right back right after these messages for my closing comments. Welcome back to my closing comments. As I think about today's program and ponder our discussions, my mind immediately goes back to where we began this segment. And that is the need for broadband is very self-evident, but the solution isn't quite there yet. There is confusion. It is complex. There's misinformation and there's a lot of misunderstanding. Certainly the necessity is not confusing, nor is it controversial or complex. The need is very clear. But how we get there, how we provide that access, whose role is it, what is the level of service, are we at the top of the game or are we lagging, are all questions that we have to wrestle with. And they are some of the questions that I hope to explore with you as we continue this topic next month. I hope to be able to add to the incredible information that has been brought to you both by Ben and Sarah by inviting the municipality perspective, by having Connect Maine as well as a couple of providers. That should help provide even more answers. I'm not sure where we're going to end up with this, but I can tell you this issue is not unlike any other in that coming together is always the beginning. When you can stay together, you'll see progress. When you work together, there'll be success. We have a lot going for us, and coming together on this means understanding that. It also means that we have to have conversations about what we want and how we're going to meet those needs, but with the public and the private, with the provider and the consumer. And then let data drive the decision. Facts will get us to the plan and to the action. That's where we need to be. That's where we will be. That's bottom line for this month. I hope to see you right back here in March. In the meantime, I thank you for the privilege of your presence as well as your attention. Thank you.